In 2007, a new animation studio was formed. It was called Illumination Entertainment. Owned by NBC Universal, their first film would be released on July 9th, 2010, called Despicable Me. No one knew at the time, but that film would spawn an incredibly successful franchise, receiving 2, soon-to-be 3, sequels, 2 prequels, and a crap ton of merchandise. This one little film would put Illumination on the map, but at what cost? The studio has often been criticized for how they make so much money on low-cost and low-effort films, with the Despicable Me series being included. But the thing is, I grew up with the Despicable Me movies. I watched each one of them as they came out, and I love them. So, are people right? Are they really just painfully average, just like all of Illumination's other movies, or are they as good as I remember them? Well, that's what I'll be finding out today. Join me as I revisit the Despicable Me trilogy to find out whether or not it is actually any good. Starting with... Out of all of the Despicable Me movies, the one I've seen the most is definitely the first one. I don't remember if I saw this in theaters. I would have been less than 3 years old when it came out, but I definitely watched it a lot on DVD. So naturally, this is also the one that I have the most nostalgia for. But I can't just go off nostalgia. This channel is about giving critical looks at nostalgic media. So when watching this, I took off my nostalgia goggles, and when I did, I found out that I still love this movie. Yeah, I think it still holds up. It's about a supervillain named Gru, who in an attempt to upstage a new younger villain named Vector, plots to steal the moon, and in the process adopts these 3 little girls named Margot, Edith, and Agnes. But while at first he just sees them as pawns in his scheme, he slowly starts to warm up to them, meaning he has to choose between his old life of villainy and his new life as a father. Yeah, the plot's pretty basic kids movie stuff, but it's okay because they make up for it with good comedy and emotional beats. The movie's humor involves a lot of slapstick, like all of these movies, well executed slapstick mind you, but it also has this edge to it which isn't really present in the other installments. It mostly comes from Gru's snark and sadistic sense of humor. Gru is a very likable protagonist. He's a bad guy, but not really a bad guy.
Zangief, you are bad guy. But this does not mean you're a bad guy.
He's kind of like Doofenshmirtz in a way. He's just a nice guy who pretends to be evil. We see in the brief flashbacks his villainy is mostly a result of his upbringing, and most of the evil things we see him do aren't that evil. Well, at least by cartoon logic. If this was the real world, this stuff would be pretty evil since he'd literally be killing people. He's also pretty nice to his employees, so you totally believe it when we see that he has a soft side. Margot, Edith, and Agnes have very simple but distinct personalities. Margot is the oldest and is therefore the most level-headed, Edith is the tomboy, and Agnes is the cute one. We've also got Gru's scientist, Dr. Nefario, whose jokes mostly revolve around him being old, but they somehow actually make them funny.
A dozen cookie robots! Look at this! Watch me!
Cookie robots? I said cookie robots. Why are you so old?
And then there's the minions. They're actually funny in this movie. They're funny because the movie knows to use them sparingly. They mostly stay in the background, which is how it should be. There's also Gru's unsupportive mother and his dog thing named Kyle. Then there's the characters who only appear in this one. There's Miss Hattie, she's a bit, and Mr. Perkins, the head of the bank. And who can forget this douchebag?
You don't get the unicorn! Ah! Uh-oh, somebody's got a frowny face.
Ooh.
Wait a minute! You don't get the unicorn! Wow, I'm so glad to see you.
There's also Gru's neighbor Fred, who does actually cameo in the second movie. And look, it's Buford from Phineas and Ferb. Didn't expect him to be in this movie. But the true star of the show is Vector.
Oh yeah!
He's a delightfully over-the-top nerd villain who's basically a complete joke, and I love him. Though it doesn't really work when they try to make him seem like an actual threat. The characters are made even better by the voice performances, because believe it or not, Despicable Me is one of those rare animated movies where the overpaid celebrities actually voice act and alter their voices. I know, it's crazy, right? But it's true. Steve Carell as Gru, Russell Brand as Dr. Nefario, and Jason Segel as Vector are particular standouts. They really help sell the comedy. Also, I didn't notice until editing, but apparently my whole thing about Gru being a bad guy and actually meaning that he's a bad guy was actually used as a tagline in the trailers for the movie. He's a bad guy, but not really a bad guy.
Zangief, you are a bad guy, but this does not mean you're a bad guy.
Just because he's a bad guy doesn't mean he's a bad guy.
The animation is okay, just like all of Illumination's movies. Though you can tell that this was their first, because the lighting looks very off when compared to their others. Most of the humans have very exaggerated features which don't look very appealing, but the texturing is pretty good. Like the rest of their movies, the animation doesn't have a very distinctive style to it. Still, not bad for the first movie, it's just their animation never really improved that much. Then there's the soundtrack, which is by Pharrell Williams and Hidor Pereira. And while I don't know how good it is on a technical level, it is at the very least memorable. I mean, who can forget bangers like this? So yeah, while not a masterpiece by any means, the first Despicable Me is still a really funny and charming movie, and a good first movie for Illumination. It's just too bad I can't say the same thing about their other work. Which is a shame, because if they kept going in this direction, I feel like they could have become a good studio. Maybe even making movies that would rival Disney and Pixar, not just the amount of money they make, but also their quality. Especially since the 2010s were the decade that Pixar started falling into mediocrity. But alas, that's not what happened. But again, this movie isn't about Illumination as a whole, just the Despicable Me series. So let's move on to... this one I actually remember seeing in theaters, along with watching it a lot on DVD. I loved the first movie, so of course I was hyped for the sequel, and at the time at least, it did not disappoint because, you know, I was 6 years old and I didn't have standards. So as you can imagine, I also have a good deal of nostalgia for this one. So you know that I mean it when I say Despicable Me 2 sucks, sorry not sorry. Yeah, I'd really like to say that this movie is at least okay since I grew up with it, but no, it's bad. But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. What's this one about? Once again, it stars Gru, who has quit his life of villainy in favor of starting a jelly-making business, to not-so-great results. But when another supervillain steals all the lean, I mean, the PX-41, darn memes. Anyways, as I was saying, another supervillain steals this mutagen called the PX-41, so the Anti-Villain League recruits Gru to help solve the case.
Wow! If I had a nickel for every time a terrible sequel to an animated movie featured spies out of nowhere, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
Wow, that's the second remark I've made at Cars 2's expense, and I don't think I've ever even really watched that movie. I think that I went to see it in the theater, and I fell asleep. 500 subscribers, and I'll watch Cars 2, maybe. Seriously, where the frick did spies come from? I mean, I guess it makes sense that in this world of supervillains there'd also be a force of good working against them, but then where were they in the first movie? It's not like they're very secretive, here they're just out in the open. Plus, I think it's funny how this movie treats Gru like he was some great supervillain, even though in the first movie, he was supposed to be a kind of lame villain who just did this one cool thing.
I have admired your work for years, amigo. Stealing the moon? Are you kidding?
I guess this movie does continue the first one in one way that makes sense. In it, we see Gru going on dates and looking for a wife that can be a mother to the girls, which he ultimately finds. Too bad she's really annoying.
Meemo, 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 meemo,
Shut up!
This movie is not funny. At all. The only times I even chuckled were a couple of Gru's lines, and I think that was mostly because of Steve Carell's delivery, not the actual writing. Like I said, it just doesn't have the same snarkier, darker edge as the first movie. Though there are surprisingly a few more adult jokes.
I know what makes you a boy.
Who you do?
Your bald head.
Oh, yes.
It doesn't help when two indicators that really try to be funny are anything but. Remember how I said that in the first movie they made sure to keep the minions in the background? Well, they don't do that in this one. Here they get an entire subplot, meaning that we get plenty of scenes dedicated to their painfully unfunny antics. And they even get several
Musical number! Me, 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 meow!
But I get it, they were really popular with the kitty winks, so they had to be in the movie more. There's this one moment where we see that the one minion is in love with Gru's partner, which first of all, how the frick would that work? And second of all, it's never even brought up again. They also just straight up recycled the joke from the first movie of Dr. Nefario slowly riding away.
This may take a while.
That's all I had to say. And when a comedy movie's not funny, it just becomes very tedious and boring. And don't think it has any good emotional beats either. They really try to ramp up the cuteness factor with Agnes here, and it is so annoying. Especially that scene at the wedding, dear God.
Shim kisses my boo-boos. She braids my hair. We love you, mothers, everywhere. And my new mom, Lucy, is beyond compare.
Dr. Nefario leaves at the beginning of the movie, meaning he's basically written out of it, which is great since he was one of my favorite characters. I do like this moment, though.
I'm happy to create an evil army to destroy the world, but nobody messes with my family.
There's also this subplot where Margot starts dating the son of the villain that is completely pointless. And speaking of the villain, El Macho is such an obvious twist villain. The moment Gru says Eduardo is El Macho and nobody believes him, you know it's gonna turn out that he's right. Though I guess I shouldn't complain since he's easily the most entertaining character in the movie, slight Mexican stereotyping aside. Though he still has nothing on Vector. Plus, what exactly happens to him in the end? They shoot him with a fart gun, but does that mean he's dead? What do they do with him? What's gonna happen to his son? Oh, that's right. Gru killed him. There's also Mr. Ramsbottom. You see, the joke is that his name sounds like Ram's Bottom.
Bottom.
Kill me. Yeah, this movie's pretty bad and really shows a turning point in Illumination. They made a good first effort with the first Despicable Me since they weren't an established studio at that point. Hop was at least something different, at least for the studio, not for Hollywood in general. And The Lorax could have been a good movie. Its poor quality mostly seems to be a result of executive meddling. But they didn't even try with this movie. This time it was already an established franchise, so they knew that people would watch it regardless of actual quality. So they put in the minimum amount of effort and it worked. The movie made nearly $1 billion, and the Minions were still making millions of dollars in merchandising. So of course, the franchise continued. This one I only ever properly watched once, and it was when it came out in theaters. I still liked it, it's just I guess I wasn't interested in getting it on DVD. This means I don't really have any nostalgia for this one, so unlike the second one, I have no guilt when I say that Despicable Me 3 is absolutely awful. Seriously, I don't know how, but I somehow managed to make it twice as bad as the second one, which was already pretty darn bad. The movie starts with Gru and Lucy getting fired from the AVL for failing to catch the evil Balthazar brat. And then Gru finds out he has a long-lost twin brother named Drew who's invited him over to his mansion and tries to convince Gru to turn back to his life of villainy. Just from that plot, you can tell that they were already completely out of ideas at this point. While the second one at least feels like a somewhat natural progression of the first movie, in this one you can tell they were just like, okay, the studio says they want another sequel, what should this one be about? In the first movie, Gru adopted some daughters, and in the second one, he got married. So what if in this one, he finds his long-lost twin brother? Sure, the kids will see it anyway. It doesn't even make sense though. In the first movie, you can clearly see a Gru family tree, and Drew is not present. Were Gru's parents just that determined to hide Drew from him? You also gotta love how all the marketing for this movie acted like Gru was going to become evil again, even though he never even genuinely considers it.
Become a villain again.
You want to take her out for a spin just for some fun?
Yay, false advertising. Oh, and they also do the same thing from the last movie where they pretend that Gru was some great villain, even though again, he was just a mediocre villain who just happened to steal the moon.
He was so proud of you, and what a great villain you were.
And back to the subject of Gru's brother, Dru is incredibly annoying. He's just Gru, but on helium and with all the obnoxious hyperactivity of the minions. And speaking of Gru, is it just me or is his accent even more exaggerated here?
I fly to the moon. I shrink the moon. I grab the moon. I sit on the toilet. What?
I can't wait to meet my brother.
And he's not the only character whose voice is off. Agnes's original voice actress, Elsie Fisher, was getting too old for the role, so she got replaced by Nev Cheryl. And yeah, it's pretty noticeable.
You don't love me! Was it fluffy?
Though I don't think she's the only one who needed to be recasted, since Dani Gayer as Edith is also clearly way too old for the role at this point.
You blew up the whole thing!
If somehow we actually find a unicorn, I'm gonna film it and get rich.
Though it makes sense considering that she was nearly 20 when this came out. But back to the plot, another sign that they ran out of ideas is that instead of just following one continuous narrative like the other movies, this movie instead constantly cuts back and forth between several different plots centered on various characters that don't even tie into each other and just make me wonder why they didn't just make a TV show at this point. I already mentioned the main plot with Gru and Dru, but there's also a subplot where Lucy's trying to get used to parenting and at one point makes Margot take some cheese from this foreign boy and then he falls in love with her and wants to get married, and this literally just sounds like an overdone sitcom plot. Then there's this one where Agnes and Edith try to find a unicorn and it's just so pointless. And don't think they forgot about the minions. After Gru gets fired, the minions hope this will mean he'll return to villainy, but when he refuses, they quit. And through some wacky shenanigans, which involves singing, they end up in jail and try to return to Gru. Thankfully, this means we get less of them than in the second movie, but their replacement isn't exactly much better, if at all. Do I even have to say this movie isn't funny? This movie continues the uncomfortable minion-human flirting gag, which, believe it or not, also appears in both of the Minions movies. They also really like to have the minions sing for some frickin' reason, and show off minion butt, and have the minions cross-dress. Look, here they do it all in one scene. Some might think those last two are fetish things, but I think it's just lazy comedy. The only difference in animation between this one and the last one is that the colors are somehow even more saturated. The characters are also bad. Gru seems uncharacteristically energetic in some of these scenes where he bonds with Dru. A bond which I don't buy at all. I feel like Gru would be unable to stand this guy. Just like me. Did I mention they do the big dramatic falling out scene? Dr. Nefario is literally just completely ran out of this one, as he apparently got frozen in carbonite, which tells me Russell Brand probably just didn't want to be in this movie. Can't exactly blame him. Lucy, Agnes, and the minions are still annoying in the few scenes they appear. Dru's butler is literally just here to get injured. And while the villain Balthazar Brad is still the most entertaining character, he is nowhere near as good as Vector or even El Macho. Also, his catchphrase makes me feel uncomfortable.
I've been a bad boy!
I've got nothing else to say. Despicable Me 3 just sucks. It's crazy how these movies went downhill so quickly. But thankfully I can now conclude this video having covered the entire trilogy. Wait, what's that? You want me to talk about the Minions movie? No. No. No! Well, the Minions were really popular, so it was only a matter of time before Illumination decided to give them their own movie. Even though it's a completely terrible idea, since the Minions were created as these funny side characters that had nothing to do with the actual movie and cannot carry an entire movie on their own, but hey, if it makes money, who cares? It's hard to describe the plot of this movie since it's so unfocused. It just bounces from set piece to set piece without any rhyme or reason. The movie starts off as an origin story for the minions, showing that they predate the human race, which makes me scared that they're immortal, and also retcons the first movie as there was literally a blueprint implying that Gru created them. But hey, if it makes money, who cares? I honestly don't know why they didn't just make a Gru origin story showing how he became the supervillain we see him as at the beginning of the first movie. That probably would have been much more interesting, but no, the minions were the marketable ones, so they had to get their own movie. And almost like they're mocking us, Gru does actually show up, but only at the very end. Anyways, as I was saying, the movie starts off as a mostly silent origin story, with the only dialogue being from the narrator, and it's okay. Honestly, if the whole movie was like this, it might actually be alright. But no, this is Illumination, they don't like to do stuff that's different. Instead, after being stuck in the Arctic for... Wait, when did Napoleon die? And when does the rest of this movie take place? That means they were stuck in the Arctic for 147 years. Conveniently missing out on World War II. Anyways, without a boss, they lose motivation, so free minions, Kevin, Bob, and Stuart set out to find them a new boss. And they do find one named Scarlet Overkill, who wants them to steal the crown of Queen Elizabeth II so she can become queen. Which they do, and yet she hates them and tries to kill them. It's not even that she just saw them as disposable, she literally says that she hates them and feels betrayed. I mean, before this, one of them had pulled the sword out of the stone, making him king, but he almost immediately handed the crown over to her. Why is she angry? Oh yeah, because we need more conflict, and this movie is desperate to reach the 90-minute mark. This is why the movie also often just stops to show us random minion shenanigans, showing us why this was such a horrible idea. Like in Despicable Me 2, we have a minion falling in love with a major female human character, making me feel uncomfortable, only for it to never be brought up again. Meaning I can do this joke again.
Wow, if I had a nickel for every time...
Okay, I'm not actually doing that again. Wow, that's my 4th Phineas and Ferb reference in just this one video. What is it about the Despicable Me movies that brings out my love of that show? Oh, but it's okay. They mix it up a little, but I also happen to want the minions make out with fire hydrants. Minion butthole, check. Minion cross-dressing, check. Minions singing? Oh, come on! Must you torment me within the first second of your movie? Oh, and because this movie takes place in 1968, we have to have a bunch of references to a time period that none of the kids watching this, nor their parents even, would have been alive for. And of course the minions are incredibly weak characters. They're not even individual characters, they're all just the same one-dimensional character. They try to distinguish the main three. Kevin is the leader, Bob is the cute one, and Stuart is kind of the wacky one, except they're all equally wacky. So what's even the point? Scarlet Overkill's an incredibly generic villain. Her backstory is that she was poor and bullied as a kid, and because of that, she now wants to become the Queen of England. Wow, what an interesting backstory. The villain family the minions ride with in the movie are infinitely more interesting than her, but they couldn't be the focus for some reason. I don't even have that much to say about this movie, it's just so... nothing. But at least it's the last one. Oh, come on! I would have just ended this video with the first Minions if it weren't for the fact that I actually saw Minions 2 in theaters, which means yes, I'm part of the problem. Why did I see it, you may ask? I don't know. I didn't want to, but I was on vacation with my family, and I guess my dad wanted to see it, so we all did. It picks up where the first Minions left off, with an 11-year-old Gru who now has the Minions working for him. Meanwhile, a supervillain team called the Vicious Six is looking for a new member after they killed their former leader, Wild Knuckles. And Gru goes to audition for a team only to be turned down because he's a kid. But he manages to steal this stone that can turn people into animals, which one of the minions immediately trades, causing Gru to fire the minions and go to find the stone. Before he gets kidnapped by Wild Knuckles, who is still alive. Oh yeah, spoilers I guess. Meaning now the minions have to rescue Gru, find the stone, and stop the Vicious Six. So, is it good? Ha! Is that even a question? Of course it's not good. I mean, it's better than the first Minions, but that was a pretty low bar. Though I honestly also might have enjoyed it more than Despicable Me 2 and 3. It's definitely better structured than the first Minions and Despicable Me 3, though again, not saying much. Because while it made the plot sound pretty convoluted, that's all just exposition, and after that, not much actually happens. I thought because Gru was going to be in this one, it'd make it better since the Minions would at least have someone to bounce off of who wasn't just some generic new character I don't care about. But as I mentioned, for a good deal of the movie, they're separated, meaning we just get more annoying Minion antics with this Kung Fu lady. Does it check off my funny Minion joke checklist? Let's see, Minions singing? Check! Minion butthole? Check. Minion cross-dressing? Check. Minions flirting with humans? Check. Though like the other Minions movie, this mixes it up a little by having a Minion fall in love with a rock. All Gru gets is a subplot where the supervillain who kidnaps him starts warming up to him and takes him under his wing, which was admittedly the best part of the movie, and is what makes it better than Despicable Me 2 or 3 in my opinion. Instead of the only good part, or in the case of Despicable Me 3, the only decent part being one character, you have an entire subplot that's good. It's just too bad it's constantly getting interrupted by stupid Minion hijinks. Again, Gru really should have been the focus of this movie. This movie tries to have some nice callbacks to the previous movies, but they're hit or miss. We see a young Dr. Nefario who gives Gru his signature jet, which is cool because I like Dr. Nefario. The Anti-Villain League is a thing in this movie, with Mr. Sheepspot making an appearance. I don't know where they were in the first Minions, but whatever. There's also a scene where they go to the Bank of Evil from the first movie, and Mr. Perkins is there, and he mentions having a son showing a picture of Vector. Which I'm sure the writers thought was really clever, except it actually makes no sense. In the first Despicable Me, Vector was supposed to be this new, scrappy, young villain, while Gru was a has-been, so why would they have been kids at the same time? Also, at one point we see a Minion with a Scarlet Overkill lunchbox. You know, the generic villain lady from the first Minions. But she literally tried to kill them all, why would he have that? Oh, and did I mention that this movie takes place in 1976, even though the first Minions took place in 1968, meaning that 8 years would have passed between this one and that one? And Gru would have been 3 years old in the first Minions. But why am I questioning continuity in a movie that's mere existence retcons the movie it's a prequel to? But back on track, this movie takes place in 1976. And just like the first Minions, it's filled with references to a decade that most of the parents of the kids young enough to like this movie wouldn't have been alive for. But the worst thing this movie did was remind me that Minion Fever is still going strong. The theater was pretty full, and the kids, and even most of their parents unfortunately, were having a blast. The movie has already made over $500 million at the box office. It was a meme that everyone wanted to see it. A mediocre movie from an 80% mediocre series from a studio that's catalog is 90% mediocre. A studio that makes average movies that all somehow manage to rake in hundreds of millions of dollars. So yeah, the Despicable Me series, just like Illumination, it started off promising before immediately taking a left turn into painful mediocrity. If I had to rank them from worst to best, it would go the first Minions, then Despicable Me 3, then Despicable Me 2, then Minions 2, and then the original. With the original being the only actually good one that I would recommend if you haven't seen it. Well, let's just hope that the Mario movie isn't complete trash, though I wouldn't count on it. Also, please don't make me review Despicable Me 4 when it comes out, or God forbid a Minions 3.